Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar. Talking about how standards benefit consumers, as we all are consumers in some way. A webinar that we are organizing in cooperation with Anec, the European Consumer Voice in Standardization. My name is Els, and I will be moderating the webinar in the background. As usual, you're all muted during the presentations, so please use the Q&A panel for entering your questions. And together with my colleague, Deborah Wautier, we'll be looking at your questions so that as many of them can be replied during the presentation. Should your question remain unreplied, please don't worry, because we intend to make a Q&A report available that we make available also via our website. We are recording this webinar, so the recording together with the presentation will be shared with you later today and can be shared with anybody interested in this topic. So can we please have the next slide, please? Because the next slide is indeed reminding you of the moderators. Myself and Deborah are moderating in the background. And we have the pleasure to have today two speakers. Yes, that's what I mentioned. The Q&A panel is there for entering the questions. And I'm very glad to welcome today my colleague, Claire Dallier, Project Manager Energy and Living at the CEN and CENELEC Management Center, and Tanja van den Bergen, who is a Senior Program Manager at Anec, is also joining us today. Before we start, we would like to welcome you with a small poll. So on the next slide, the poll is appearing, because we would like to know, as you're all consumers, you're exposed to many standards without even noticing it. So we would like you to think about what was the first standardized product that you used this morning. So give me a moment to launch that poll. So all the attendees awake this morning can have a moment to think about what was the first standardized product that you've used this morning. Maybe you're a coffee drinker, you like coffee a lot, and you need, first of all, to have your coffee in the morning before starting work or bringing your kids to school. Can be anything, in fact. Okay. A little bit scattered, interesting, but indeed, as I was myself a bit expecting, most of us like to drink first coffee or tea in the morning before we kick off our journey of the day. So yeah, interesting. I would like to end the poll now and share immediately the results with you. You should be able to see them on the screen right now. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor immediately to Claire now for jumping into the presentation. So Claire, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elsa, and good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today and to also be joined by Tanja, so the Anec and from the European Consumer Voice in Standardization. Thank you for sharing your insight about what you did this morning, and I will jump directly to my next slide. To introduce you to this webinar and how standards benefit to consumers and how we can see from your answer today. So standards are in our everyday life, and they are often visible. I still see the, but they are vital and everywhere. So making our consumer life safer, fairer, and easier. So on screen, you can see a few examples of standards covering different categories of products, such as toys, bicycle, mountaineering equipment, or playground for children. So standards help us to make our products safer. Standards are also at the core of the EU single market. It was mentioned in the new EU standardization strategy just released last month. And it's good to recall that European standards deliver great benefits for both businesses and companies. So creating a level playing field in a single market, but also increasing consumer confidence. A recent and over example was in a field of consumer safety was with the COVID-19 outbreak. CEN and CENELEC were on the front line to develop in a record time a workshop agreement on community face covering with guidelines for community mask. So it was in response to an urgent request from the European Commission at that time, and it was made available for free download. So this work is now handled further within a CEN technical committee for the development of CEN technical specification and reaching a higher consensus. I thought it would be good to briefly present who the standardization organization are. So in Europe, there are 3 standardization organizations recognized by the European law. So CEN, the European Committee for Standardization, developing general standard. CENELEC, the European Committee for Electrotechnical Standardization, delivering electrotechnical standard, and ETSI, the European Telecommunication Standards Institute. So the close collaboration between CEN and CENELEC was consolidated at the start of 2010 by the creation of a common CEN-CENELEC Management Center that we call CCMC, and in which I'm working. One additional slide is just to show you the network of CEN and CENELEC, so that connects more than 200,000 technical experts. Most of these stakeholders are represented in a CEN and CENELEC community through the 34 national members who constitute the final decision makers within CEN and CENELEC through European organization, association, federation, consumer, environmental and societal organization, through institution and governmental bodies, including the European Commission and EFTA, through affiliates, so national standards bodies in countries that are cooperating with the European Union, and also through international cooperation with ISO and IC, with whom we have technical cooperation agreements. So the European standardization system is a unique system that includes all actors and stakeholders. And it's important to recall that the core value of the standardization system, so it's developed, defined through a process of sharing knowledge and building consensus among technical experts. And the role of CEN and CENELEC is to provide a platform for the development, for this knowledge sharing of European standard and over technical specification covering all sectors. But now I will dive a bit more into the topic of today, the consumer sector. I start by giving you an overview of the standardization activities in these sectors. So we are CENELEC organized across 14 business sectors. So you can see for the consumer sectors, the number of publication, almost 900 and a bit more than 50 now for 2020, and the number of new publication every year. The next annual report for 2021 will be published in June this year. You can also see, I put it on screen, that 50% of our portfolio for the consumer sector is developed through technical cooperation agreement between ISO and CEN to have a complementary approach and avoid duplication of work. Currently, we have 24 CEN and CENELEC technical committees that are carrying out standardization activities in consumer products. A large proportion of these standards are developed and drafted at the request of the European Commission. So in response to standardization requests, they fall mainly into the General Product Safety Directive, but also concern a number of pieces of European legislation, such as a toy, textile, or personal protective equipment, as example. So you can see on screen the broad category and range of products that are covered by this technical committee. From sports goods, toys, consumer clothing, footwear, but also furniture, and much more. As I was mentioning, a large proportion of these standards are drafted at the request of the European Commission. So it was good also just to recall briefly that what are harmonized standards that are developed by the European Standardization Organization, so CEN and CENELEC, to provide technical specification for product to respect the EU law. So the European standard translates essential requirements of EU legislation into requirements for manufacturer. And they are a main tool for compliance with European legislation. And also, so I mentioned, so we have today 3,600 references of harmonized standards published in the EU, European Union official journal. And the other number is 34. So just to recall that having one single standard created with the consensus of all interested parties and adopted across European market instead of 34 conflicting national standards, help also significantly to ensure common level of safety, security, and sustainability. Now, for the sector, for the consumer sector, the main piece of legislation is the General Product Safety Directive. This legislation provides only a generic definition of safety, meaning that all products for consumer safety, for consumer use that are not covered by a specific legislation, such as toys or machinery or PPE, sold in the European Union must be safe in order to be in conformity with the European legislation. So it's indeed difficult to adopt a legislation for every single product which exists or may be developed. So the General Product Safety Directive provides a broad both legislative framework of horizontal nature to deal with such products. And this is where standards prove to be a tool supporting the implementation of this general and horizontal legislation by developing common benchmarks on what constitutes a safe product. So the European Commission entrusted CEN and CENELEC with 20 standardization requests active under this legislation, covering a wide range of products from childcare articles, bicycle, gymnastic equipment, laser products, fire safety or safety of music player, just to name a few. And in this case, for the GPSD, so the European Commission set the safety requirements for specific products and issue a standardization request to CEN and CENELEC. But today, in 2020, the European Commission proposed a new consumer agenda, setting out the main consumer policy priorities under the European Union for the years to come. The overall aim is to take stock of a number of trends affecting consumer market and the related challenges. We have seen that incidents like with linked to COVID-19 have further highlighted some of these trends. For example, the increased use of online sales channels and the need to ensure safety of consumers in this context. And this included the revision of the General Product Safety Directive last year with, in 2021, the European Commission's proposal for a new regulation on general product safety to modernize the general framework, but also better address some of the new challenges, like I mentioned, online sales, but also linked to new technology. We have seen that new revisions are coming also and expected in the field of consumer, namely with the Toy Safety Directive for 2022. And we have at CEN and CENELEC developed a position paper. We have included the link in this presentation for the revision of the General Product Safety Directive, where we also highlight the role of European standards have to play also in fulfilling this ambition and tackle these new challenges. And I will conclude by recalling the uniqueness of the European standardization system and its openness, inclusivity, But CEN and CENELEC community are the key driver to this. It's reflected in our CEN and CENELEC strategy 2030. And at European level, we have built strong partnerships with key European organizations representing consumer, environmentalists, workers, and other social interests, and that are recognized by the EU Regulation 1025 from 2012. So the participation of social stakeholders in European standardization is supported by dedicated European association. So as I mentioned, the role are acknowledged by this EU Regulation 1025 2012 on European standardization. And as you can see on screen, societal interests are represented by for consumer by Anec with us today, so the European Consumer Voice in Standardization, by ETUC for employee and workers, and by ECOS for environment. So this is very important to recall that we are an open system and engaging with all stakeholders to develop the best standard for the consumer. So it enables me to welcome Tanya today, and thank you for sharing, for coming and joining us to this webinar. So please, Tanya, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Claire, and good morning to all. Let me continue then about the consumer participation in standardization and how this works. So as Claire just mentioned already, participation of all national stakeholders is encouraged in the development of European standards. But we also know that bigger business has most to gain from influencing the content of standards and also has the knowledge and resources to participate. We also know that national consumer expertise in standardization is fragmented in many countries, or it simply does not exist in some countries. So as a result of this, Anec has provided the collective European consumer voice since 1995. So we are the European Association for the Coordination of Consumer Representation in Standardization, or shorter, the European Consumer Voice in Standardization. Next slide, please. So let me just explain this, how the system works. We know that the European standardization system is based on the national delegation principle. It's essential, but from the consumer perspective, it is insufficient for European standardization, let's say. If I take the example of toy safety, you should know that in our network in Anec, we rely on 6 toy experts from among our 34 countries to defend the consumer interest. So these experts speak directly for the consumer in CEN and CENELEC. Now, without Anec, this would mean that only in 6 national delegations in CEN and CENELEC, they could call on consumer expertise, and that also 28 national delegations would have no consumer expertise in their delegation. So without Anec, there would be no effective consumer voice in standardization. Next slide, please. So Anec was established in 1995, and our aim is to represent and defend the collective European consumer interest in standardization, first of all, both at governance and technical levels of CEN, CENELEC and ETSI, but also sometimes at the technical level in ISO and IEC. We also participate in the development and revision of European policies and laws, which are related to standards, consumer protection and welfare. Just to mention one, the General Product Safety Directive, as Claire mentioned, which is currently under revision. And finally, the use of standards is of course also important. You can have the best standards in the world, but if there is no market surveillance, if there is no enforcement, the standards are of little value. Anec relies on funding from the EU and EFTA through annual grants, which are made under multi-annual framework partnership agreements for our core mission. Our activities are financed by EU projects or also sometimes funding from foundations. Next slide, please. A very important regulation for us is the standardization regulation, as Claire already mentioned, because this regulation sets the legal basis for financing the representation of weaker stakeholders in standardization. And it outlines political expectations for strengthening the participation of weaker stakeholders in the system, which is called the so-called inclusiveness. Annex 3 of this regulation sets out the categories of those stakeholders whom the European Commission supports through financing a representative European association. Again, Claire already mentioned the 4 categories. So Anec represents consumers, ECOS, the environmental interests, ETUC, social or workers' interests, and then we also have SBS representing small and medium enterprises. The European standardization system is unique in its inclusiveness, and Anec believes that inclusive European standards that meet the needs of society as well as of industry can give products and services of European business an advantage on the global stage. Next, please. Just some facts and figures. The Anec membership mirrors the membership of CEN and CENELEC. This means that today, 34 countries can apply for membership in Anec. We have 7 areas of priority: accessibility, child safety, domestic or household appliances, digital society, services, sustainability, and traffic and mobility. We are a partner organization of CEN and CENELEC and also a member of many EC expert groups. Last year, we participated in over 175 technical bodies of CEN, CENELEC, and ETSI, and in over 25 technical bodies of ISO and IEC. And just on the picture, you see the difference. In CEN alone, we have 50,000 or more than 50,000 experts from business, while in Anec, we have 75 experts in CEN committees on behalf of consumers. Next, please. I would now like to give you some examples of our work that we have done in standardization to show how standards can benefit consumers. Let's start with personal music players. In 2007, we launched a campaign, Pump Down the Volume, to introduce safe sound limits in the standards for personal music players. Personal music players, they were popular, but no volume limits were set in the standards. So as a result, new safety requirements were set included in the European standards, and thanks to the standards, consumers and especially teenagers are now better protected against hearing damage. Let's then move to barbecues. We were successful in ensuring the amendment of the standard for barbecues was adopted in 2017. This amendment introduces a safety symbol, which you can see on the screen, to warn consumers that they should never use a barbecue indoors because of the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. Carbon monoxide is a gas that can be fatal. So thanks to Anec and thanks to the standard, consumers are now better informed and protected. Next slide, please. Cigarette lighters. In the past, many fires were attributed to children under 5 years of age playing with cigarette lighters that were not fitted with child-proof devices. Anec was instrumental in drafting or help drafting the standard that ensures child-resistant mechanisms on cigarette lighters. So as a result, the standard will prevent fires and will protect children and consumers. On the right side, you see domestic household appliances. The first generation of those European standards for household appliances, they had a limitation or exclusion clause in them, which indicated that children, older people, and people with disabilities could not use these appliances without supervision. We felt this was a discrimination. So as a result of an Anec campaign, the standards for household appliances were then revised. This work has enabled that millions of household appliances sold every year to feature improved levels of accessibility and safety. So thanks to Anec and thanks to the standards, ovens, toasters, kettles, hair dryers, and very many more household products can now be used safely by also vulnerable consumers. Next slide, please. Then hooded sweatshirts, coats, or jackets, they often feature cords on or drawstrings to improve the fit of the garment. But on children's clothes, these cords or drawstrings present a choking and strangulation hazard, particularly when used in the head or neck area. Following a request from Anec, a standard was developed, which is banning now the use of cords and drawstrings in the head and neck area of clothes that are intended for children below the age of 7 years. So thanks to Anec and thanks to the standard, children are now protected against choking and strangulation when they are wearing clothes. And a last example, this is still under development. Following the COVID situation, CEN is developing a technical specification for community face coverings. And here Anec has asked for transparent masks to be included in the scope so that people with hearing impairment can rely on lip reading. Next slide, please. So that brings us to the key learning points of this webinar. How do standards benefit consumers? As a first point, standards make our lives easier. Have you ever thought why your mobile phone works everywhere when you are away? It is because of standards. But at the same time, have you ever thought why you need to carry a bag full of electrical adapters when you travel abroad? Exactly because of a lack of standards. Claire, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Tanya. Yes, and I think it's important also to recall that this year the EU single market turns 30, and the European standardization has been one of its success stories. So as we have seen, European standards are often visible that they are vital because they make the products we use daily safe. And they deliver consistent quality by defining good practice, which can be repeated time and time again. I think it's important also to highlight that the ambition of standardizers is also to include and adapt to evolution in technology and try to proactively anticipate and mitigate risk that can be reasonably foreseen in new products. And the last point I would like to mention is also, I would like to thank Tanya for joining today, because the successful standard development relies on effective engagement of all stakeholders to exchange on their needs and agree on the state-of-the-art solution and technical way forward. So CEN and CENELEC will continue to invest in efforts in facilitating the access of all relevant parties and ensure an open and neutral process engaging with all our stakeholders. So I would like to thank again Tanya for joining me today to raise the European consumer voice and showcase you also some of the success stories, and also provide you today a bit an update of the consumer sector, what we do at CEN and CENELEC, and the upcoming new legislative revisions that will impact also our work in the future. And I would like to conclude and thanks all participants that joined today. I think also, as mentioned at the beginning, that the slide and the presentation, the recording will be shared with you by email, but will be also available on our CEN and CENELEC website in the near days. So thank you again. Thank you, everybody. I don't know, Tanya, if you want to add something for the conclusion, maybe.
Thank you, Claire. Well, just also thank you from our side for giving us this opportunity to join you in this webinar. And as you can see from the key learning points, also the last 2 points are, of course, important to mention. So standards, they help promote environmental protection and sustainability as well. And also they ensure that people of all ages and abilities have equal access to products and services. So it's really important, as is mentioned, to get involved. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Tanya and Claire, for this very interesting topic presentations. I would just like to mention that we received 2 questions in the Q&A, but as we promised, the webinar will only last until 10:30, and we are 10:30 at the moment. So we duly noted your question. We do realize that the question is still unanswered, but we make it available as a Q&A report on the website. Should you have any additional questions, please get in touch with us. So thank you very much, and everybody's of course welcome to join our next webinars. Thank you. Bye-bye.